We're going to turn the program immediately over to our chair, our really superb chair, Colin Rajah, in just a second. If I might just signal among ourselves who we are in this room, just so we know as we move forward that what we work on is not just political and it's not just practical, it's also personal. Because 42% of us in this room from the civil society delegates are migrants, refugees, or members of the diaspora. So just about half of us are who we are talking about and working for. Let's remember that. We've got delegates from all regions of the world. Of the about 240 or so delegates here, 37% of us are from Asia, 21% from Africa, 22% from the Americas, which include a large number of diaspora groups and people, and 16% from Europe. Again, many diaspora. We're happy to have with us, we're delighted to have with us some 50 participants who've spent the last 2 or 3 days in the People's Global Action on Migration, Development, and Human Rights. Welcome and thank you, PGA people. Our colleagues unified in our purpose here this week in Bangladesh. We're delighted to have some 20 government guests with us today and tomorrow, and 50 observers from international agencies and regional organizations. So thank you all. Thank you all for joining for this work today and tomorrow and beyond. And with that, we turn it immediately over to our chair for the Civil Society Days 2016, the one and only Colin Rajah. Thanks.
Thank you so much, John. It's indeed an honor and a real privilege to be here. I want to make a special mention, a big, huge thanks, and if you'll join me to thank the active, very, very hard-working team at ICMC helping put this together, as well as the very hard-working International Steering Committee. So a big round of applause for the work that both of these groups have done in the many, many months leading up to here. As I mentioned, it is indeed an honor to be here following such big footsteps. I want to give a big shout out to the co-chairs that have come before us, especially since the Civil Society Days has been organized by Civil Society Day itself. Special mention to, of course, from Mexico, John Bingham, William Goyce from Geneva, Clarice Somobwe in Mauritius, Michelle Lavoie in Stockholm, and Ignacio Parker last year. And we'll be hearing from Ignacio in a little while, but you know, these are big, huge footsteps, and indeed very honored and humble to be following in that. This is us, we are civil society, we're a very diverse group of people, but I want to recognize the diversity. I know John just walked through us and how many we are, but I think it's really important to recognize who we are. So if I can do a little bit of a call out to those of you from Africa, who've come from Africa, please stand up and let's do a big round of welcome for those from Africa. And quickly following, from right here in Asia, those from Asia. Yeah. They're just a little small little group. And very close by from Europe, our European friends, please. Let's recognize. Very diverse as well, very diverse as well. From Latin America, probably the furthest distance to come here. From Latin America, thank you. 30, 40, some 50 hours to get here. Thank you for being here. From the MENA region, Middle East, North Africa, please. Let's recognize, yeah. And of course from North America, include myself, North America. And not particularly a region, but I thought it's really important to mention. From Bangladesh, thank you for having us. And please, let's recognize our sisters and brothers and all from Bangladesh. Thank you. So this is who we are, civil society, quite a bunch. And this is our 9th GFMD, 9 years already, about a 10-year span. The word pivot has been used a lot in this recent months, but I think it's really apt, really appropriate to call ourselves of being in a pivotal moment in our history, in our movement. This last decade, this last 10 years or so of the GFMD, we've seen a tremendous, robust growth, development, sort of a mini boom, I call it, in our movement, in our civil society movement. Many of our clusters, our networks that have become the pillars of the civil society days didn't even exist 10 years ago. The Global Coalition on Migration, Women in Migration Network, the Pan-African Network, the MAID Network, gosh, all these strong networks that are so much a part of civil society days today weren't even around the last 10 years. And it's precisely because of our organizing that has made it possible for us all to be here this last 10 years. So that's where we've come from in this last 10 years. But today, we're also at this pivotal moment, as we call it, because we're just emerging right now from the first ever landmark high-level summit on migration and refugees. The high-level summit and the New York Declaration that came out of that summit is going to be something that we're going to be talking a lot of in the next 2 days. And following, we're just embarking on a 2-year process to develop and negotiate a global compact on migration, as well as a global compact on refugees. What does this mean for us? I think this is going to be a game changer. This is going to be our next big paradigm shift. The last 10 years, we've seen this mini boom. This next 2 years and beyond, we're going to see another mini boom, a big pivotal shift. So the question is that, we've got this tremendous opportunity we face in front of us. But let's also recognize we're in this time that is increasingly, in a global political climate, that's increasingly repressive, increasingly xenophobic, increasingly anti-migrant. We're seeing this wave of change, political change happening that is not good for us. And our rights are getting bashed. Our rights are getting beaten. So what does this mean for us? So this is this moment of paradox. Opportunities on the one hand, tremendous challenges on the other hand. So in a way, this might be the moment that we've been waiting for, that we've been calling for decades of our work. The question for us then, are we ready? Are we ready for this moment? Are we prepared? And I think we need to talk about 3 things to get ourselves ready for this. And it might be a little bit touchy, it might kind of brush some nerves, but I think we need to face this challenge head on. Firstly, I think we need to go beyond our institutional and organizational structures and boundaries. These exist, these infrastructures exist to support our movement. This is the time we have to keep our eyes on the prize, our eyes on the goals, and head towards that and go for it. And the structures that exist are going to be structures that have to support that. We cannot be bound by things that hold us back. So we need to keep focusing on that. I really believe that this new, just as we've seen the last 10 years, this next period, we're going to see new formations of civil society emerge. And we need to be prepared for that. We need to move with that organically. Secondly, I think we need to find unity in all our diversity here. We need to find the unifying points that we need to stand together on. This is what's going to make the difference in our advocacy around the global compacts. If we don't have this, if we're not together on this, we're going to lose the fight. We know it's going to be a really, really tough struggle. So we need to be unified in that. And the relationships and the alliances that we form in this next period, those are going to be so important in what we're going to be able to achieve. But beyond all that, given this tremendous wave of repression and xenophobia, we need to be firmly rooted in the principles that are really important to our movement, especially the principles of human rights and justice. If we are not firmly grounded and rooted in those principles, this wave of xenophobia and repression and anti-migrant sentiment is going to blow us away. So as we move forward, we also need to be firmly grounded in these principles, and I think that's going to be very important. I want to close my remarks today by making a special mention and call out to my fellow migrants, particularly migrant and diaspora leaders of organized communities. This is not just individuals, but migrant diaspora leaders of organized communities. I really believe the time for the tokenism of our voices is done. Let's put a line under it, put a full stop. No more. No more. let's be able to say no thank you when we get invited to say, oh, we'd like to hear your story. No thank you. But let's say yes, thank you, to tell our story as part of how we formulate our policy recommendations and inputs. That's going to be very important in this period. Our lived stories, our lives, formulate what we have to live, what we have to offer in terms of what's going to come about in terms of real solutions and change that's going to make a difference in our own lives. We need to claim our space among all the other leaders of our movement, all the other experts of our movement, all the other change makers of our movement. We need to claim that space and be in the forefront alongside all the other leaders in this movement. That's only the time that we can find the solutions and change that we've been waiting for. So, time for action is now. But what is that action? And are we ready for that action? We've got a really robust program before you. You'll see it's packed. It's really, really packed. It's going to be a busy, exhausting 2 days, but I really believe, I'm optimistic, this will help us begin those steps to prepare for these challenges as we make this huge shift forward in the years to come. I look forward to talking to you again at the end of the day tomorrow to see how far we've come this first 2 days and where we launch into in these coming years. So thank you very much. Welcome to Global Forum Migration and Development 2016 Civil Society Days. Thank you all. I now have the privilege to put on my facilitator moderator hat, and I'm very, very happy to reunite what we sort of privately joke about, our Kigali team. Michelle knows what I'm talking about. Our Kigali team, Ima Grok in the back, working the room, Milka and Sinta, and my sister, Impilo Shangibutene from South Africa, who has played a pivotal role in terms of protecting and defending human rights of migrants especially, but of all people in the South African region, and who played a critical role in our recently concluded civil society consultation on the MIKIC process as the rapporteur for East and South Africa. So I welcome my co-chair, my sister, Impilo, please.
So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Colin used the word movement a couple of times in the few minutes that he stood here and spoke to us. And when you greet people in the movement, you feel the force, because movements are about bringing about change. So if we say good morning to people in a movement, you should hear the response saying good morning, you know, moving. So I was warned, because oftentimes people accuse me of wanting to take up all the time. So in order for me not to take up all the time, I'm going to just read the few notes that I had made for myself here. And my comrade Roshan, where are you, Roshan? Would know that we do not start gatherings like this in our region without a struggle song. A struggle song for liberation, struggle songs by migrant workers missing their families, or mothers missing their sons and daughters who have had to go to other countries to look for better economic opportunities, or families who have been separated because of wars and having to find themselves as asylum seekers or refugees in other countries. So, ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends, fellow asylum seekers and migrants and refugees, dignitaries, government representatives, and officials from international organizations, I greet you. My chair here, comrade in arms, fellow Kigali team member, as you have said, thank you. And thank you to all of you for this opportunity to be the co-chair for this year's Civil Society Days. I thank you in particular for the trust. It is indeed my pleasure to be with you and having to spend the next 2 days with global civil society deliberating on migration and development. And especially as our theme this year says, it's time for action. We've just said we are a movement. It is time for action. Doing rights-based governance of migration and development in our communities and across borders. I believe this is a fitting theme. It is my hope, indeed, that we will, by the end of the 2 days, come up with very concrete actions and indicators of the work we will do going forward. This GFMD Civil Society Days in particular comes at an opportune time after governments have adopted Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals with the driving principle of leave no one behind. And leaving no one behind means taking along with us all the marginalized and discriminated groups, including refugees and migrants. We've also just heard Colin mentioning the New York Declaration. The African continent also adopted Agenda 2063, where we've also heard about the recent adoption of the MIKI guidelines. All these have the intention of ensuring also the protection of migrant rights and in assisting to contributing in these processes. Therefore, it's very important that in our deliberations, whether it's plenary or in working sessions, that we are very clear that we are not just going to be talking, but we are going to come up with concrete action for ourselves, for our governments, for anyone who touches the lives of migrants, but also indicators that will help us in monitoring whether or not we are actually progressing towards achieving those actions that we would agree upon over the next 2 days. Our deliberations, of course, should include issues around fighting xenophobia and strengthening the general protection mechanisms for migrants. In Amnesty International in particular, we have one campaign called I Welcome, which is about fighting xenophobia, but also strengthening asylum and migration policies. Lastly, so as not to take too much time, I would like to end briefly with a few stanzas from a poem that was said by our former president, Thabo Mbeki, during the adoption of the South African Constitution in 1996. I am an African. I owe my being to the hills and the valleys, the mountains and the glades, the rivers, the deserts, the trees, the flowers, the seas, and the ever-changing seasons that define the face of our native land. I owe my being to the koi and the sand, whose dissolute souls haunt the great expanse of the beautiful Cape. They who fell victim to the most merciless genocide our native land has ever seen. They who were the first to lose their lives in their struggle to defend our freedom and independence. And they who, as a people, perished in the result. In my veins causes the blood of the Malay slaves who came from the East. Their proud dignity informs my bearing, their culture a part of my essence. The stripes they bore on their bodies from the lash of the slave master are a reminder embossed on my consciousness of what should not be done. I am the grandchild of the warrior men and women that Yinsa and Sikukune led, the patriots that Tashayo and Pepu took to battle, the soldiers Mushweshwe and Ngungunyane taught never to dishonor the cause of freedom. I am the grandchild who lays fresh flowers on the Boer wars, Boer graves at St. Helena, who sees in the mind's eye and suffers the suffering of a simple peasant folk. Death, concentration camps, destroyed homesteads, a dream in ruin. I come of those who were transported from India and China, whose being resided in the fact solely that they were able to provide physical labor, who taught me that we could both be at home and be foreign, who who taught me that human existence itself demanded that freedom was a necessary condition for that human existence. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to end here for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mpilo. Moving words and very good to get us started. Next up, we are indeed honored to be here in Dhaka in Bangladesh. This is a very important chairing of the GFMD that I think many of us have looked forward to for a while. And I think a lot of that has to do with this next person, His Excellency Shahidul Haq, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Bangladesh and the 2016 GFMD Chair in Office. Please, Excellency.
I thought I have a name. No? I'm not very familiar with the word excellency. So, especially when amongst the friends and colleagues and co-partners. So, please do not further embarrass me. I have a name which is Shaheed, and I'm popularly known as that, especially in the civil society. Welcome to Bangladesh. I hope your landing and taxiing was comfortable. We're extremely happy and delighted to welcome the civil society to Dhaka for the GFMD 16. I'm kind of lost as to where to start, and asked John this morning, John, where should I start? John said, do I need to tell you this? It should be compact. So I'll come back to compact. And then when I was listening to Rajah, I realized that whatever I thought I will talk about this global politics and changing time and time for action. So I said, what is left for me to speak about? Listening to our dear colleagues from South Africa, who's fought relentlessly for years to get out of apartheid. And we remember during our War of Liberation in 1971, we were inspired by many leaders, including South African leaders. Time for action. What action? How action? And whose action that we are talking about? That I will talk. Before that, I just want to flag that we are passing through a very difficult time. And every time I try and look at the global politics, and I think we have enough on the plate, but next morning we see that there's another one onto the top of the plate. Especially about migration and immigration. We have never seen so much of an attention. I think it's too much of an attention, to be very frank, especially in the domestic national politics on migration, which is good, but not too good, because some of the attentions are extremely negative. We also see a rise of populism. It's very unfortunate, but, and it's centering around mostly about people who do not look like us. And that's where the problem is. That's where we need to have action. I think Farid Zakaria, in his recent article in the Foreign Affairs, captured the issue of migration quite vividly in the context of populism. And I'll quote him because I think we need to realize that what that we are dealing with. I normally use the word hot potato, that migration is a hot potato, and we have difficulties to hold on to this. But he has further elevated and the challenge, and I quote him, immigration is an explosive issue. I don't think we have ever used that word, on which populists united among themselves. So that's where the explosion comes from. And opposed to their elite antagonists, unquote. I think this is what the geopolitics of migration all about. So when we are talking about a human rights issue, a technical issue, we should never forget that it's part of geopolitics. It has always been. And that's why in our chairmanship, we have always emphasized, please do not consider migration to be a simple movement from point A to point B. It has never been. Let's not make that. If you do that, then you lose out in the global politics. The other one that during our chairmanship we have been consistently focusing is the whole issue of governance. How long you will continue to manage migration? Can you manage migration which is highly explosive and political? It has to be part of the political governance. Otherwise, we lose out in long term. Keeping this in focus during our chairmanship, and thanks to all our friends and colleagues, that we have been successful in bringing out some of the issues that often we fail to pay due attention. I remember in Geneva while we were taking over the chairmanship, I asked John, what do you think about the concept of governance? If you bring that in, do you think that there will be too much of a resistance? I think John was one of the few people who said, no, it's time for us to talk about it. There's a lot of people who put fear of God in me. He said, this could bring down your chairmanship. If you talk about governance, and especially if you have a dedicated session on the migration governance. Thanks to all states, all partners, we survived. At least as of today. Okay. What is that governance that we are talking about? Why we need governance? We need governance because migration is a political issue. It's an economical issue. And that is why we thought our chairmanship, in addition to the governance pillar, will have a sociology pillar and pillar for economy. Migration is very individual. It's an individual endeavor. And often I say, it remains a mystery as to why someone moves and other one doesn't. It remains a mystery. I don't think any sociologist or psychologist ever been able to find the real cause of movement. Now, how do you handle that? That's the challenge. John has asked me to talk about compact. I will talk about compact. How many of you have heard about migration compact? Can you raise your hand? Okay, fairly good number. What happened is that when states were almost failing to control mobility across border, they came to United Nations for the first time and asked the Secretary General what we do. This arrival of people and movement of people across the globe, not in a very orderly and systematic manner. Most of the states were finding itself very difficult to so-called manage it with the instruments and institutions which were established, innovated in the post-World War period. Can you really effectively manage a phenomena of that nature with the instruments and institutions which were established in 40s, 50s, and 60s? Absolutely not. It utterly failed. First time we saw that people could, in large number, walk across political border, deny the borders. First time. It has happened once before. I'll not mention. But this time in large number, and nobody could stop them without visas. So this is a very scary phenomena for a state. So they came all to New York and said that something has to be done. And what is that something? Let's call a summit. That's how Secretary General called the summit on 19th July to talk about two trends of population movement. One, refugees, the other one, migrants. When these discussions were taking place in New York, primarily in New York, in terms of reports and drafts, the focus has been too much on refugees. They said, we need a compact for refugees. Fine, we need actually. Time has come when we should revisit the responsibilities and the challenges centering around refugee issues. Fine. But if you look at the flow of movement, you'll see that all that we are talking about is certainly not concerning refugees. There are also migrants. So what do we do with them? And some of us were really surprised, saddened to see almost a repetition of the debate that we saw in the last century in 50s, when post-World War, an instrument was devised to deal with refugees, which is known as 1951 Convention, and for migrants, nothing. There was an organization set up to deal with refugees, and for migrants, a program which eventually became IOM. So our mindset was stuck off in that is the only way we can address the most explosive issue of this century. Some of the countries, some of civil society members were extremely vocal. They said, no, if you're talking about a compact for refugees, let's talk about a compact for migrants also. And that is the time, as a chair of GFMD, we wrote a letter to the UN suggesting that there should also be a compact for migrants. And we also suggested that what that we are talking about in terms of compact, which I will share with you if I have 2 minutes. It wasn't easy. One of my colleagues, I don't know where she's sitting, Sadia, she used to be our DPR in, she's sitting at the back. She was in the New York, and she often used to call me and say, sir, people are teasing the member states delegates. He said, here goes the compact lady. Literally. Because they thought it is absolutely impossible the state will negotiate a compact. At least some. Okay, fine. Eventually, the report of the Secretary General very kindly retained the idea of compact. And eventually, we know New York Declaration. Some of you have been in New York, like Rajah and some of the other colleagues. They know what took place behind the door in terms of keeping the compact as we see today. Now, as I said, we should never forget the strength of any movement is the people, not the state. Have you ever seen a state leading a revolution? Have you ever seen a state leading a major transformation? No. Because state is not created to do that. It's not meant for that. It's rather very worried when it sees unnatural movements. So, what's compact? When we had the discussion among some of us, we said compact cannot be designed overnight. There's also a thought in the Secretariat, UN Secretariat, that on 19th September there would be a compact for refugees and compact for migrants. And some of us said it's not possible. You cannot have a compact on migration without having a broader consultation, especially with the civil society. And that will need more than 2 years. So we were given 2 years. Why we need a consultation? To have a broader and deeper understanding of the phenomena. We are yet to explore the explosive phenomena called mobility and migration. Why? Because there are 4 major trends of mobility. First, mobility for migration or mobility, I'll be interchangeably using it, for sustainable development. And that has got recognized in the Agenda 2030. No more states can say that this is something we don't recognize and we are not going to implement it. There are targets and other things. That's one trend. It's a major trend. And it will continue to increase. People will continue to move for development, whether we like it or not. Second, people are also forced to move under an irregular situation, which is called human trafficking and smuggling. I need not to explain it to you. So there's second trend, major trend. And there are times when it really becomes a challenging phenomena. And then you have displacement. Displacement due to conflict, due to natural disaster, due to climate change, name. This is neither movement for sustainable development nor refugees or nor irregular migrants. So this is a third trend. What is the fourth? Fourth is refugees. You cannot talk about migration leaving out refugees. So I call it one frame, 4 trends. We know that refugee issues are much more settled. There's an organization, fine. But when we are talking about migration, we have to bring the refugee issue in to draw a coherence among the mobilities. And that's why I think UNHCR invented the word mixed migration. People, when they move, it remains a mystery, but they don't say that I'm a refugee and I'm a non-refugee. They don't do that. They say I'm on the move, especially under difficult circumstances. So, but what is the basic of these frame? One frame is the protection and human rights of migrants, irrespective of their migratory status. Something fundamental has changed, which we perhaps did not notice, is that for the first time, states agreed that human rights of migrants are responsibility of a state, irrespective of their migratory status. The 1990 convention could not be widely recognized and adopted because of only one fundamental issue, which is, and I know there are people here who have done PhD on that, because it talked about rights in irregular situations. So in Agenda 2030, first time it has been recognized. So that's a major change, and possibly we don't know what implication that will be in that if tomorrow I'm in America in an irregular situation, I have every right, like a human being. That's a major recognition and change that we have to talk about. So rights and protection is fundamental, whether it is refugees, non-refugees, displaced people, just talk about anyone. And states have agreed to ensure that. And we need to see how that gets implemented. So, broader and deeper understanding. Compact is the way it's evolving is a tool or means to eliminate tensions and dilemmas. Sounds very difficult. There are fundamentally 2 dilemmas that state face. And as a member of the state, often I confront that from my colleagues. What are those? The state's desire to control sovereignty versus people's right, especially of non-citizen. How do you ensure rights of a non-citizen? That remains a question. And especially when that non-citizen in an irregular situation in your own country. So that's the first dilemma. And state is yet to resolve that. And I think Agenda 2030 will tell them how to do that. The second is individual. It is individual who moves. It's an individual undertaking. So individuals' desire to move versus availability of migration path. Very few. So what do you do under that circumstances? So this is the basic two dilemmas that we need to resolve in the compact. Third, I hope that the compact which we'll eventually see and negotiate would be also an instrument for advocacy. Because migration rights will not automatically get implemented, even if we all take an oath today as a state. So that's the fourth. The way we see compact is comprehensive contract between state and individual to keep them safe wherever they are. So here I'm talking about responsibilities of origin countries. Because often when we represent origin country, we assume that it is the responsibility of destination countries to ensure protection and human rights. So it is extremely important that origin country equally takes responsibilities. Now, I will not take much of your time, but once we have that, our understanding, two things. There could be three broad options, and that's where the civil society's role is extremely important. Compact could be a convention, could be a binding instrument, provided states agree to negotiate and design one. That is the best that can ever happen to the migrant community, where states' behavior is regulated through a convention. Whether we will get it or not, I don't know. First. And that's where civil society has to debate as to which way they want to go. The second that could happen eventually is having something in the model of Agenda 2030, where we would have a strong narrative followed by goals, migration goals, because otherwise the goal 17 will be confused. So migration goal, migration targets, migration indicators, and then an implementation process and a monitoring process, as good as Agenda 2030 or SDG. That could be one way of, where states would assume the responsibility of implementing migration goals, targets, and indicators the way they have done in the case of Agenda 2030. That could be the second path to move. Third, it could be mixed of both. And the best example is the Paris Declaration. If you look at the Paris Declaration, because of the complexities of the climate change, as like a migration and mobility, you'll see that part of the Paris Agreement is binding on the state. And part of it is non-binding, voluntary. So could we have a compact, an instrument, which will combine the two, depending on the convergence of our interest, our priorities, and responsibilities? So this is the three paths that I can think of, we can think of, and deliberate on it. And we would like end of the deliberation as to how this civil society looks at it. On migration issue, it is civil society who should lead. And I mean it. The way civil society has led both the climate change and the anti-mine convention. There are examples. So, which way you will go depends on you. What that we need to remember while we are talking about which way we'll go in terms of compact is avoid politicizing it. Migration is a political issue, but don't politicize it. There is a difference between a political issue, a geopolitical issue, and something which is politicized. Don't securitize it. There has been an attempt in the past. It has failed terribly. That's not the way we can manage migration. Second, and it sounds very funny, avoid, for the time being, interagency fight. And I have said it in Geneva and New York, I'll say it again here. Can we ask the UN agencies and international organizations that for the 2 years, or not 2 years, 18 months, when we are negotiating this convention, they stop turf fight. They can start again after 2 years, no problem. And that is only in one field, migration. Let's focus on migrants' rights. Let's focus on migrants, not on which agency will get what. So that's my second. Third is we need, and Rajah has mentioned it, we need a partnership, very unusual partnership. I call it alliance. And it's very difficult. We are already seeing it among the states. It is not an alliance of state. It is the alliance of state and civil society, which I call a new hybrid collaboration. I'll end with a thought, which is extremely destructive thought. I think by 2050, we will see a different way of governance. Because the way we are challenged by situations and circumstances, we cannot continue to run ourselves the way we have been running ourselves. So by 2030, it is individuals will be so empowered that they will continue to take decisions disregarding states' regulatory system. And in that circumstances, we would need an international body, entity, I hate to call it an organization, where there will be equal say in the decision-making process, in real sense, of both state entities and individual entities or non-state entities. And one area that we can have the experiment is migration. I know I'm asking too much, but let's keep the... I have a colleague and a friend here, Michelle Klein-Selman. She's looking at me saying that Shahid must have gone crazy today again. So look at that. Look at a new international system. Anyway, our current system is not functioning well, where organizations would consider individuals' power as well, along with states' power. Let's keep this in our mind, talk about a compact. A compact where individual migrants will be protected. They will have the right. And I can tell you that will create more wealth than anything on the earth. Anything on the earth. If we are able to have a good compact that will not only be force to stabilize our society, it will also be a huge force to create new wealth, new opportunities for all of us. Thank you.
Wow, that's quite a task before us, and we thank you again, Shahid, for this tremendous kind of sort of roadmap for us to embark on. Next up, so we move along in the program real quickly. Next up is on the civil society partnership on the ground here. Someone who probably doesn't need a lot of introduction to many people here, Syed Saiful Haq from Warbi Development Foundation here in Dhaka in Bangladesh. Also a member of the Bangladesh Civil Society Coordinating Committee that I know many of you are part of, that has been robustly organizing things here on the ground over the past year. So Saiful, please.
migrants' rights are human rights. Women's rights are human rights. Child rights are human rights. Migrants' rights are human rights. Women's rights are human rights. Child rights are human rights. Shubho Shakal, Shuprabhat, good morning. Honorable Bangladesh Chair in the office in 9th Global Forum on Migration and Development, Mr. Shahidul Haq, GFMD Civil Society Chair, Mr. Colin Rajah, the co-chair, Mrs. Cecil Milpo Sangye Bhutan, Excellencies, fellow delegates and distinguished guests. Good morning, Assalamu alaikum. On behalf of the local organizing committee and World Development Foundation, I extend our heartfelt welcome to Dhaka for this important meeting. The title of this meeting is a testimony to the seriousness of our purpose. It is indeed a time for action. As a result of economic, social, and political problems and instability in many countries, as well as accelerating climate change, the volume of pace of migration have increased beyond anyone's projections, bringing serious problems in transit at borders and in countries of destination. Thousands are dying in transit and leaky boats in the Andaman Sea, in the Mediterranean. Hundreds of thousands cannot find welcome in countries of destination. Economic and cultural clashes are increasing, and we are seeing a dangerous increase of xenophobia. In response, there have been summit meetings at the United Nations in 2013, on the 19th September 2016, and groundbreaking process has been launched to create a global compact on migration by 2018. Civil society has been and is integrally involved in this process. It is about us, and it must not be without us too. Migration is among the oldest forms of human activity. Human beings have always migrated for a better life, for food, water, land, and for work, for economic development, as a result of pressure and challenges like wars, political instability, and economic uncertainty, because of changes in the climate, and out of sheer human curiosity. We go where we think we can do better than where we are, better both for ourselves and for our families, many of whom we leave behind, but frequently our experience has proved difficult and dangerous, and the outcomes have not always been beneficial. For years, we have been talking about how to make the experience better for all, and now we have a formula. We want safe, orderly, regular migration in a human rights framework that will honor, preserve our human dignity, and maximize our potential and contributions. Some of our best minds and bravest hearts have taken on the challenge, mapping our aspirations and our needs. But now we must act. It is to translate our ideas into action. The result of our deliberations will feed into many other processes undertaken by the United Nations, the constituent states, civil societies, and the private sectors. Bangladesh is a country very much affected by migration. Our geographic location at the confluence of two of the greatest rivers of Asia, the Ganges and the Brahmaputra, the physical characteristics of the country with its huge delta and shifting land, the very severe impact of climate change, the small size of the country, and huge and growing population of the country all contribute to migration flows. I myself migrated as a young man for greater opportunity, and when I returned, founded the Welfare Association for the Rights of Bangladeshi Immigrants, along with some of my returning migrants friends, and help and maximize the contributions of migrants living and returning to Bangladesh and those lives in the diaspora. It is an honor for me today to welcome you all here. In this occasion, I would like to extend my thanks and gratitude to the ICMC to choose us as the local partner to organize this event, and the Bangladesh chair in office, Mr. Shahidul Haq, and members of his GFMD task team, including IOM, for having supported us in all ways to successfully organize these civil society days. I hope all of you will contribute sharing your experience and knowledge for the better governance of migration and the protection of the rights of all migrants and their families. Thank you all.
If you ask me, this is certainly true for the year 2016, and we heard quite a bit about that this morning. For those of us working on migration, working for migrants, working as migrants, I'm afraid it's been a good year and a bad year. And what do we make of that? 2016 was the year that the world started implementing the UN 2030 agenda that should leave no one behind, including migrants, displaced people, refugees. I think we can all agree that we're far from reaching that goal. But there might be hope there. There is movement, there's agreement on those sustainable development goals. 2016 was also the year that the Paris Agreement was going into force. That should put a halt to climate change, and by de facto should then also put a halt to people being forced to move because of climate change. Also there we can agree we are far away from reaching that goal, but there might be hope because there was agreement on this Paris Declaration. And 2016, we heard quite a bit about that this morning, was also the year that governments, for the first time in the history of the United Nations, came together on the level of heads of states and ministers to agree on a better deal for migrants and a better deal for refugees. 193 member states adopted a declaration called the New York Declaration that makes a host of commitments to migrants, including to the protection of migrants and migrant workers. It's not only the Global Compact on Migration that came out of this New York summit and the New York Declaration. There's a whole range of commitments in that declaration that governments can already start implementing now, or should already be implementing at the moment. But what will happen with this on the ground? At the same time, 2016 was also the year where we saw more and more populist, xenophobic movements rising all around the world, not just in the West. Fear-mongering, xenophobic speech have become the rule in too many places. 2015 was sadly a very deadly year for refugees and migrants trying to find a safe haven. Unfortunately, 2016 is not doing much better on the record, and there's still way too many people unnecessarily dying while they try to find safe havens. And then that might beg the question of all of us. What are we doing in these meeting rules? What are we doing in these global summits? Talking to each other, agreeing on agreements. What good does it do for people on the ground? How does it actually help migrants, families, children that are in dire situations to have hope for a better future? Everyone needs to answer that question for him or herself, of course. Is it worth it? I guess most people in the room would say yes, or at least a skeptical yes, because I guess otherwise you wouldn't have made the trip to Bangladesh and be with us here today this early this morning. My answer would also be yes. It's very necessary that all of us sit in this room and talk to each other, learn from each other, that we have some sort of a moral compass on the global level to go on. But we also are in need of something else than just sitting in these global meeting rooms and talking to each other. And I think we heard a lot about that this morning. We really need to think of a better way to translate everything that we recommend, everything that we analyze, everything that we agree upon into actions and changes on the ground. Better policies, better legal frameworks, better justice, better access to right. What do we do with all this energy in the room this morning, this afternoon, tomorrow, and then on with the governments on Saturday? What do we take home? What do we commit to? And that leads us to the theme that we chose this year for the Civil Society Days and to the program. We've been saying it, it's time for action. We have to do right-based governance of migration and development, not only talk about it. We have to do it in our communities and we have to do it across borders. Now, just before I take you through the program, maybe I'd share a few basics about the Global Forum on Migration and Development. If I could maybe ask from the people who are in the room, are there people who've never been to a Global Forum, for who it's the first time that you all have heard of this Global Forum meeting? If I could see a show of hands. Oh, fantastic. That's quite... Welcome. Thank you. It's good to see so many new people. And also for those of us who've been already to a couple of forums, maybe just a quick reminder that the Global Forum on Migration and Development is an informal meeting space for governments, but also for civil society. It's non-binding. Governments and civil society think home that they change on the ground. But it's not a place where binding agreements are made, which is maybe its strength and also its weakness. It's maybe something that's related to the question of governments that our Chair Shahid this morning talked about. But that is what the Global Forum is and has been over the years. So there is a civil society program that is today and tomorrow, and then on Saturday there will be a full day of common space where civil society and governments will come together. That is the moment that our chair, Colin Rajah, will report back to the government what we've been doing over the last 2 days. Our most important recommendations, our call upon governments, what we want them to do, will be in that common space in the morning. So in that sense, one of the big tasks that is upon us in the next 2 days is to give Colin all the information that we can, all the recommendations that we can, so that he can make a plea to governments on what we recommend them. And then after that, after this opening where Colin Rajah will report back on the Civil Society Days, there's going to be about 6 hours of common debate between governments and civil society on a various number of issues. But then again, it's not our only task today to come up with recommendations for governments, and we also heard quite a bit about that already this morning. We also want to focus this year a little bit more on, okay, there's a lot of things that governments might need to do different in practice or in policy or both, but what is it that we need to do differently or more strongly or more dedicatedly? What do we focus on in the coming 6 months or a year? We have the Global Compact process on the way. The next Global Forum on Migration and Development is already in 6 months in Germany in June. So what do we focus on? What are our priorities as civil society? Then a little bit about the Civil Society Days that we've just opened. As you've already heard, the Civil Society Days are a formal part of the Global Forum. They are organized for and by civil society. They're very closely connected and linked to the government days and the government program, but the Civil Society Days are organized by civil society representatives. And in particular, I'd like to thank all the international representatives of the International Steering Committee who have been working with us tirelessly over the last, well, years, I should say.
Good to see you all again. An exchange between Alice and the White Queen from Through the Looking Glass of Lewis Carroll. One can't believe impossible things, stated Alice. I dare say you haven't had much practice, said the Queen. When I was your age, I always did for half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. I do believe in impossible things. Last GFMD, October 2015, in Istanbul, we reflected and acted on the need to achieve concrete targets and goals to improve the conditions around the world for migrants. Goals in the then newly adopted 2030 agenda, but also goals in the 5-year the 5-year 8-point plan, and goals for civil society working in migration and development in general. The 2015 edition was the biggest yet in GFMD Civil Society Days history, with 360 participants. Believing in impossible civil society days, today in Dhaka and just in about 6 months in Berlin. Last year, at the opening ceremony of the GFMD Common Space in Istanbul, as chair, I delivered a speech based on choices. Choosing bridges rather than barbed wires, fences and prisons. Choosing to root migration policy and its implementation in evidence and values. Choosing to reject the disgraceful and dishonest siege mentality fanned by an increasing number of populist leaders, by xenophobic media. Choosing to no longer surrender to such intolerance. I do believe in impossible things. And I thought very inspiring different statements of Zahid, His Excellency, a man who believes in impossible things. I know that dreams take effort, take time, take commitment, and above all, take belief if they are to become manifest. Colin referred to my passion of long-distance running, but you know, it took me more than a few months after I fractured my vertebrae before I could walk across a room and begin to dream of walking a whole way. Now I'm back competing in long-distance running and winning. And the tougher it gets, the more I'm determined. Far from being unique, accomplishing what seems to be impossible things is almost part of daily life for most of us. I do believe in impossible things. And though it is difficult for me, and I think for all of us, to meet migrant families at risk, or meeting the hard-working frontline workers, and to have to tell them, don't worry, all will be better soon, we're working on it. We have beautiful language, you know. Have you heard of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda? And the New York Declaration, yeah? And what about the principles to guide actions for children on the move? Or the bridging papers of the Civil Society Days of the GFMD? You know, you can download them on our websites. We have guidelines to refer to, government commitments, a momentum, a lifetime window of opportunity, 2 years, 18 months, to develop global compacts. And civil society is well organized. It will soon be better. Do they still believe in impossible things we're telling them? With their incredible resilience, they are the ones who daily believe in impossible things until they no longer have the strength to do so, or tragic circumstances led by migration policy based on prejudice and fear decide otherwise. As they do, I do believe in impossible things. Up early to take the 6:30 shuttle before breakfast, I had time to think of 6 impossible things before breakfast for today. 1, I believe in the human rights framework, in the guidelines, in the prospects of global compacts. I believe in the global work we do. I believe in... But all that's my intellect. That's my ability to think in a logical way. Who is guiding me. He's a good companion, you know, and I believe in him. But there is more. The second one. I believe in the spirit of sustainability, even though The words may be a bit esoteric, and to be quite honest, I'm not exactly sure yet what this means. But I have never felt that sustainability can be achieved if we focus on what we must give up. Rather, I believe we must focus on what, if we make the right choices, all of us can share in a new and much improved world. An essential belief before breakfast with the widening income gap between the rich and the poor. Number 3, this is a tricky one, I can tell you. I believe it can snow in Dhaka. And if it doesn't work the first time, I can have another try. Eh? You haven't seen the snow yet. This is snow. By the way, get them in little packets like this. You can get through the customs with them, you know. Number 4, I believe that all of us can up our averages of laughter and giggles by relooking at life with more childlike innocence. Humor and laughter may be just a ticket to unleash our collective creativity, improve our health, and meet the other, no matter its migration status, no matter its function or position in society. 5, I believe if you're losing steam in your key position, change and let somebody else take over. I believe in the energy of youth combined with the experience of the grey-headed. I believe in inclusive discussion between generations. I believe in preparing the future generations. So here I have my direct reference to the organization I work for, which is a child rights organization. But number 6, at times where the speed of shrinking civic space is very deep, very fast, across borders, I believe in our claim for a rightful place by demanding genuine participation of civil society in governance at local, national, regional, and global levels. Finally, I believe in the impossible, and I practice believing every day, and sometimes even before breakfast. I believe in our unity, in diversity, and I believe that it can propel us to new levels in our evolution. I believe in impossible things as the way to make them possible. How about you?
Nasir, you've let some snow back here. So. Thank you. That's really powerful. Keep moving on in the program. I'm great privilege to welcome back to the plenary here William Goy, somebody who I often, along with Kathy Taktakian, often look to in terms of my mentors and following in these big footsteps. William has been the co-founder of the People's Global Action on Migration, Development and Human Rights, PGA, and is playing host for this year's PGA in the region. So we welcome back William and tell us a little bit about what happened in the PGA this year. Thanks, William.
Thanks, Colin, and good morning, everyone. I'm not sure why you're saying I'm back, but I've always been around, I think, and I'm wondering how much longer. But I was in a conversation just now, just a little while ago, talking to Nunu, a colleague of ours who has been with us in the PGA also from the beginning, who mentioned that not everybody knows what the PGA is, right? So, of course, it's the People's Global Action. But first, can I just ask those who were responsible for this year's PGA, the International Committee, to actually stand up so that you can be identified? Okay. And keep standing. And can I ask those who were in the PGA in the last 2 days to please stand up? Okay. So for those, thanks a lot, because for those who do not know what the PGA is about, I suggest at some stage over the next 2 days, you should have conversations with the people that were standing up to find out what it is. And honestly, it's a very messy place. Okay? But it is important for us to understand, and I've been reflecting on why we have the PGA. Because it has been happening every year in some sense since 2006. And my sense is, as I was reflecting on Nunu's, what she said a little while ago, and a conversation I was having in the van with 2 of our colleagues from the region, is I think some of us come together because we realize that this space is not enough for us, which has been created for us. The 2 days of the government, of the civil society days in the GFMD. That we need more space. We need more space. We need to come together more and earlier. And so some of us have been coming earlier just for the sake of getting our act together. Just for the sake of getting our act together. Because we know how important it is when we come to this global space, because there are so many unfinished conversations from previous PGAs, from previous years, and even from this PGA that have not happened. And those conversations need to continue for us to become that wave that we heard Vanessa talking about, or when Miplo was saying that to actually move together. And that is what the PGA is about, I think, that coming together to be able to see how we organize ourselves, how we find our own space together, to think, to work together, to strategize together, and see what conversations are not happening in the GFMD that must happen among ourselves, and we must find a way of bringing to the GFMD. And that is, I think, what makes what this PGA space is about. Because, you can come to Dhaka for the GFMD, and in the next 2 days, if this is all we do, stay here and be here, we will never know what migration and development means for the people of Bangladesh. We will never know what migration and development means for people in countries like Bangladesh and others where there is a real struggle on the ground to make that link. And for us to be able to feel that, to take a rickshaw ride, to be in the marketplace, to be in the throb of people, becomes important to sense what is happening on the ground. In the PGA, there were many firsts this year, and I think that's why this is actually, in a certain sense, does not reflect what happened this year in the PGA, the civil society days. Because I think for the first time we have had a government, a chair, that has recognized civil society, the strength of civil society and what civil society brings to government discussions. Because for the first time, the chair invited the organizers of the PGA much before in the last Friends of the Forum meeting to share with the other governments what our plans were. For the first time, we have had representatives of the PGA coming in an open invitation to come to this morning session, to come to the closing, and even in the government days, in the common space that we will have in dialogue with the government, to have representatives from the PGA participate in that as well. And this has broadened the space that we have together. It has broadened the space that we have together. Those of us who come for the PGA and those of us who come for the civil society days, to be seen in this bigger, broader space for us is important. And that is why it's good that we are in this room together today. There was a very important advice given to us by the Bangladesh chair in the opening of the PGA. And he said, space is not going to be created for you. No government will give you space. He said, you got to keep knocking and keep knocking and keep knocking and make yourself known, make yourself visible. That is what we have been doing. Our sense in the PGA was one, and that was asked by one of our colleagues from Bangladesh. The first question he put to the representative from the state was, we talk about compact and SDGs and all that, and it remains such a top-level discussion for many of us that it doesn't translate so easily on the ground. How do we do that? And this we have found also a difficult task within the PGA itself, because the PGA brought together something like 250 participants from 25 different countries. 250 participants from 25 different countries and different sectors. We had people from Via Campesina, the peasant movement, from the trade movement, human rights, gender, labor, and development. And I'm not sure, media, I don't know who else I'm missing. But we had different sectors of people interacting on this issue, and we realized there were so many conversations among ourselves that were not finished, that need in which to strengthen the unity we have. And we have been deliberating to see how some of that is taken on, even as we continue and even as we go back. Our sense is that when we say time for action, today this has to translate into something very real as we engage with governments in this year's GFMD. I know we said, she defined the GFMD as this informal, non-binding, voluntary kind of space. But when we say time for action as civil society, then that non-voluntary, informal, non-binding cannot remain like that. We have to transform the nature of the GFMD itself so that we can move towards something a little more towards binding, a little more towards getting our act together, a little more towards this not being as, because they wasted so much on this banner. Tomorrow after 2 days they change this and say, okay, government days of the civil society. We could actually just have GFMD 2016 and use the same banner over the 4 days. Yeah? But this has to stop. This has to stop. And we should see how we can find ways of working with governments. Maybe not in this space yet, but maybe when we go back and what we take from this space to work with our governments at national and regional level, so that when we come to this space, it's really something that we bring to the space in terms of moving forward, and not the same recycled discussions every time. So this is something that we are thinking in the PGA, we've been thinking in the PGA, in the sessions that we've been having, in the discussions that has been happening at the leadership level. How do we come to that transformation, which sounds fantastic, but how does it happen? What are its elements? So in this year, for example, we looked at overall migration governance, and we said existing human rights and labor standards form the framework for migration governance. But we all know that while this framework exists, and in many of our countries it exists, there is a dire need for the implementation, for this to be made meaningful. And that is why how we challenge states and what work we do in making states accountable to what they have signed on to in different places, the standards, the conventions, and the different processes that we have to monitor human rights and labor rights. It's time that we looked at ways of making those standards meaningful. How do we monitor that instead of just being that framework? It is very clear today for us in the discussions that we had over the last 2 days that we must impress upon governments that in bridging migration and development, and as they talk more about it and as we buy more into this discourse, we should help move migration policy away from one that is rooted in deterrence. We discussed about labor migration, and we looked at many things like fair and ethical recruitment, which should form the baseline of all multilateral frameworks, bilateral agreements, and respect for labor migration. We need to start talking about the corruption that happens in the issuance of work visas and the trading of visas and the subcontracting that happens and the contract substitution that happens. We need to start talking about it more openly with governments. In terms of mixed migration, regardless of their status, people traveling in large movements require protection of their rights at all stages of their journey. If they are at risk, we should, in this forum over the next 2 days, bring that strong message to say that protect and rescue first. States should implement the protection that is found in the OHCHR guidelines. States should abide by the principle of non-refoulement and make justice accessible to migrants at any stage of their journey. With regard to, we've had discussions on climate change, and we feel that this is an issue that has not been tabled at the GFMD. We were hoping it would be in this year, knowing that Bangladesh is one of the countries that will be severely impacted by climate change. This is a discussion that must come on the table of discussion on the GFMD, climate change and migration. This year particularly, we spent a lot of time and decided to focus and move forward in our plans as we continue to prepare for next year and the years forthcoming. We looked at xenophobia and racism, and we are aware of how toxic the environment has become. That's why it almost feels uncomfortable sitting in the room today, knowing what is happening to migrants outside. And we have to find a way of getting this message to the governments in the GFMD, that this message they have to start talking about seriously. We looked at the campaign, and we are aware of the campaign that the UN will put together on racism and xenophobia. So let's keep our eyes out for how we will join that campaign. But we have decided that we will take that campaign in our own hands as civil society. We will not wait for UN institutions to do that, because like Shahidul Haq said a little while ago, we know what happens when the UN institutions take it up. But we join forces with them and we see how we can move it together. I see some smiling. Borders and detention. States should end immigration detention. Simple. We were not happy that in the Global Compact there was some space for detention of children. This cannot happen. This is a clear message coming from the PGA. At no time should children be held in detention. Alternatives to detention should include open door shelters and community-based programs. In relation to migrants, in relation to this process, and that's why I'm saying I think this GFMD, coming away from this GFMD, we go with the same modality back, then we would not have succeeded in understanding the climate in which we have to work on migration issues anymore. From this GFMD, we should hope for and push for governments to see how they will go back with us at the national level, at the sub-regional level, at the regional level, how we can work with them on some of the issues that have been discussed here and the issues that we would like to see them working on in relation to migration. This cannot be the space where we are looking for 1 or 2 slots at the table. The space that we need to have with them is back home, and we should ask for that space more aggressively now. Because this dance of coming here and to be in this space, to be careful not to step on each other's toes, this dance has to stop. Because the music has changed. And as we go out, we know that. We know that. And so let's be aware of that. How do we go into that common space? How do we bring our discussions over the next 2 days to some concrete suggestions? And how do we take it up to governments and say, enough, let's go back and draw up a plan of action? Because in this year, you'll have the global compact process and things like that happening. And again, there'll be a lot of space for us, but that space might not necessarily be transformative space. And this is where we need to see that. And we need to see how, like Shahid said, and like we were told, I was surprised. It was almost embarrassing in the PGA, the government challenging us that we are not doing enough as civil society. It gets embarrassing that governments in UN also, after the global compact process, some governments meeting civil society in the corridors saying, oh, we thought you'd have a stronger statement. Yesterday in our closing ceremony, the Foreign Secretary came prepared for a question and answer session and was happy that, okay, that was in a sense not, he had to make a message. But I think governments are beginning to see that and some are daring to say they want more from us. And I think it's time we organized ourselves, and we have been trying to do that in the PGA and some of the issues and strategies we have been discussing, which we will share in the deliberations of these 2 days. And hopefully by the end of it, Colin will have something to the government which says, enough, time for action now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, William. I said welcome back. I said welcome back to the stage. William is very shy. Hard to believe it, but William's very shy and have to be persuaded to come back. But really important things to kind of bridge what the discussions happened the last 2.5 days, and in fact the last 11 years of the PGA into today, and really important kind of marching orders we have. Certainly someone who's new to this stage, we want to welcome Lynn Shotwell for the very first time in this GFMD. We have a business mechanism. So what is that? What is this business mechanism? Lynn from the Council for Global Immigration is here to represent that process and tell us a little bit about it and what we can expect to hear from the business mechanism. Lynn, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Colin, and good morning, everyone. So I have the honor today of representing the GFMD business mechanism, and I'd like to thank all of you for inviting us to join you. Last year in Istanbul, the GFMD endorsed the creation of the business mechanism, and the mechanism has been coordinated this past year by the International Organization of Employers and the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on Migration. So IOE is the world's largest and most representative private sector business associations. Its members are some 150 business and employer organizations from over 140 countries. The IOE represents employers in the ILO and is recognized as the voice of business in social and labor policy debates across the UN system as well as in the G20. So the aim of the business mechanism is to facilitate sustained interaction between migration policymakers and business leaders. In other words, to fill the empty seat of business at the GFMD table. The private sector is multiple and diverse, just as broader civil society is. So over the past year, the GFMD business mechanism has built a community of business leaders from various sectors across all regions of the world and of all sizes. They all have different interests in migration, but they all agree, and I'm sure we all here also agree, that coordinated, well-regulated, and well-managed migration policies are an essential part of a well-functioning labor market and contribute to peace and prosperity everywhere. Inclusive growth and sustainable development require open markets, competitiveness, and innovation. And all of these imply robust and coherent policies to facilitate the movement of people. And I think the answer to this lies in the convergence of the business needs for labor as well as business interests in human rights. First, let me talk about the business case. The need for labor migration and the integration of migrants into labor markets around the world is already urgent, and it's only going to grow in coming years. Now, we know the drivers are mostly demographic. Developed economies are characterized by aging populations and falling birth rates. The shrinking domestic labor pool means shortages of workers at all skills levels, and in many places there's a serious skills gap that coexists with continuing rates of high unemployment. So our challenge is to fill this gap. Migration will only be a small piece of that. We will also be working to fill the gap by training and education of local workers for positions, but this is a gap that we need to fill. We know that migrants, when they're employed in decent work, increase productivity and raise consumption, thereby generating additional jobs and benefiting society at large. So migrants contribute to diversity, bring new skills, and increase innovation and productivity. We also know that circular migration and remittances aid in development. But restrictive migration policies or lack of respect for human rights hinder the ability of both employers and migrants to contribute to their full potential. Better adapting labor migration systems to employers' needs is important for all parties. Restrictive policies can have a negative impact on international skills mobility. Employing migrant workers is often costly, lengthy, and plagued by administrative uncertainties for employers. And such dysfunction may also contribute in some cases to policy failures or abuses of human rights, for which both companies and policymakers share a degree of responsibility. Moreover, as the current refugee crisis demonstrates, both home and host labor markets can be significantly affected when large numbers of individuals are displaced from their home countries because of conflict or environmental disaster. To the extent that part of the problem lies in insufficient certification of training and skills recognition, the private sector can be a useful partner for governments. Thus, engagement with employers can lead to better migration policy and better implementation. The employer's responsibility here is not only to illuminate obstacles and help identify future needs, but also to do their share in workforce skills development and lifelong learning programs. Engaging with employers, notably small and medium-sized enterprises, can also help identify skills gaps in terms of language proficiency, formal skills recognition, and technical skills transfers. Companies can also provide modern communication technologies that improve connectivity between migrants and their families, foster the transfer of knowledge, skills, and experience, and facilitate transnational business. As such, new technologies developed by the private sector have a huge impact on how migrants' contributions to societies can be leveraged. Coordinated policies are also necessary to ensure the protection and promotion of human rights. Employers have an important stake in ensuring fair labor conditions and decent work for the migrant workforce, a responsibility shared among governments, employers, and trade unions. Employers, of course, have an ethical stake in ensuring that the communities in which they live and do business respect human rights. But the rights of migrants are far from being only an ethical responsibility. They are a legal obligation and have economic impact. Abuse of migrant labor, human trafficking, unethical recruitment, and supply chains that lack transparency can cause severe reputational and financial damage to companies. So employers are active in a large number of public and private sector initiatives to help address these abuses. For example, the IOE and the International Organization on Migration are working together to develop IRIS, the International Recruitment Integrity System. The ILO has also launched the Fair Recruitment Initiative, which aims to prevent human trafficking, promote safe migration, and reduce the costs of labor mobility. So it's essential that we ensure better synergy and effectiveness among these and numerous and diverse other initiatives